baby said I'm gonna end up doing time.
Wanna take a ride? From the Northeast United States, this is your host, Mortal Dilemmas. Thanks for tuning into my first paranormal collection, and thanks to those of you who contributed stories. I know it's been a bit of a wait for some of you, and I appreciate your patience. We're now 10 days from our favorite holiday, which I'm also rather proud to say was my conception date. Some of us are just destined to be a little spooky, I guess. Anyhow, grab a sweater, kick back, and tune into your imagination. And of course, have a happy Halloween. I was home alone one night with my 6-month-old daughter. I was watching TV. In order to hear Trinity, I would keep a baby monitor in her room and keep the other one with me. It was about 3 in the morning. My baby was sleeping soundly until I heard her start moving. She would usually wake up at 3, so I thought maybe she was just restless and would go back to sleep. Then the baby monitor turned on and she let out a scream. I started to stand up to get her bottle ready when a ragged old woman's voice said on the baby monitor, "Look at the baby." My daughter started bawling really loud. I ran to her bedroom, and when I got in there, Trinity stopped crying and went back to sleep. It still scares me to this day, and I wonder what the hell was in that bedroom with my daughter. My grandfather was diagnosed with a tumor in late 75 or early 76. He passed away about 6 months later, and his death was pretty hard on my mom and grandmother. They both reacted in different ways, but my grandmother became very depressed. He was her first love. They'd been married for 26 years at that point. Mom was 15, Grandma was 46, devoutly Catholic, and has always been. She denies anything ever happened if you ask her today. This all took place in one location, my grandma's house in Buenos Aires, Argentina. From as far as I understand, nothing is connected to the land. It was just marsh or something before being converted to urban housing in the 50s. The only people living in the house were my grandmother and mother. My mom says that the experiences started about a week after the funeral, for her at least. She would hear heavy footsteps in the hallways walking past her room back and forth late at night. This went on for some time, every night, maybe a week or so. She says they sounded like her dad pacing outside, but she didn't tell anyone. Then on one night, she was in bed, trying to fall asleep, when the footsteps started up again. Except this time, they walked to her door and stopped. Then the door, an old-school heavy wooden door, unlatched and opened up, and then the footsteps walked over to the side of her bed and stopped. She says she was too scared to look up and just fell asleep with the sheets over her head. When she woke up, she says she was rattled, but she realized that it was her dad, and that he had just checked up on her like he used to. The footsteps stopped after that. She says afterwards that it was like my grandfather telling her that everything was alright, like one last goodbye. After that experience, my mom finally brought it up to my grandmother. Her response is what makes this anecdote for me. After telling her about the footsteps and the door unlatching, my grandmother simply replied, and I'm paraphrasing, "That's possible. He's been tucking himself into bed with me every night since he left." Mom asked to clarify, and Grandma said that she could literally feel and hear him walking to his side of the bed and see the sheets move around as if he was getting in. Exactly like he was still there, just invisible. I like to think that he felt how sad she was and decided to spend a few more nights with her before moving on. Nothing else happened to my mom, and my grandmother never mentioned anything about this to anyone, as far as I know. Don't know for how much longer he visited her for. I understand this is probably just due to the stress and sadness of losing someone so close, but what they saw and heard seems a bit more vivid and believable than similar stories I've heard. Probably my own bias. Anyways, that's it. I just wanted to share this little family ghost story. I was maybe 5 or 6 at the oldest when this first happened. My parents split when I was an infant. My mother stayed in Chicago, while my father moved down to Florida with me. The custody case was a few weeks during the summer I would spend with my mother. It was not a positive environment, and there are holes in my memory from that time, but this one memory stands clear. I was in my bed around 11 p.m. or so, late enough for my mother and stepfather to be in bed. I began to get a feeling I was being watched. In my room, I only had one window, about the same size and shape as one of those close to the ceiling basement windows. It was about 7 feet up on the wall, and would be near impossible to stand in front of and peer in through for a normal man. At one point, I looked up and saw a figure outside the window, a head with scraggly unkempt hair. Though it was just an outline, I could see eyes, red, glinting eyes staring back at me. The figure persisted in staring at me for minutes before banging on my window rapidly a few times and continuing to stare, almost like it was trying to antagonize me. I just stayed there under my covers, frozen and terrified. Eventually it stepped away, either losing interest or giving up. Part of me believes it was my stepfather, as he was often cruel to me, but part of me honestly believes I experienced something paranormal. Many thanks to zhannypublishing for letting me narrate this story. Check out their website in the description below. Many years ago, I worked on an ambulance first responding to 911 calls. One day we were dispatched to a person not acting right type of call. When my partner and I arrived at the apartment complex, the first thing we noted was that all the people living in the same unit, except for the patient, were standing outside with terrified looks on their faces, shaking violently. It was raining and nighttime outside, but I quickly approached them and asked what was going on. The 25-year-old male looked at me and said, "We were playing a game, when suddenly my girlfriend started shrieking and screaming. All the lights went out, including the candles. Then we saw her lay on her stomach on top of the board game. My girlfriend's head, hands, and legs all went into the air. Suddenly she fell to the floor, stood up, and ran into the back of the apartment. My partner and I then cautiously walked up the steps to the apartment door with mag lights. The door was already cracked open. I politely knocked and introduced myself as a 911 ambulance paramedic before walking inside the apartment unit. The light switch did not work. I could hear a creaking wooden noise in the background, squeaking back and forth. All the walls were painted dark colors like black and maroon. It was obvious that these people liked heavy metal, skulls, and dark paintings because they were represented all over the walls. I started walking through the apartment, calling out for the patient, looking for any sign of her. As I walked deeper and deeper into the unit, it started getting colder and colder. Finally, I saw her, in a rocking chair. She was slowly rocking back and forth, looking straight forward. I introduced myself to her and asked her what is going on. There was no answer from her. She kept rocking back and forth. I got up close to her, looking for any medical abnormalities. Her eyes were so dark, either her pupils were that big or her eye color was just that dark. All of her vital signs were normal. Her blood sugar was normal. She did not appear to be having any seizure activity. I tried to get painful stimulus out of her by squeezing the shoulder or a sternal rub, but she would not even flinch. I couldn't find any track marks on her for drug use. Throughout all of this, she just kept rocking and looking straight forward. The rule of thumb for paramedics now for this situation, not being alert to person, place, time, or event, is that she needs to go to the hospital. I tell her that since she is not talking with me, I'll be moving her to a stretcher. Suddenly the rocking stops. All sound everywhere stops. I can hear only breathing noises. I lift under her armpits and my partner lifts under her legs. As we lift, we notice something very strange. The patient stays in seated form, rigid. We lay her on the stretcher and wheel her to the inside of the ambulance. As we load her into the back, cracking noises like breaking tree branches filled the air. I look over at her and notice now that she is looking right at me with a huge, scary, crazed smile on her face. No matter where I moved, her head and eyes traced me with that same unwavering smile. My partner looks over at me, sympathetic, knowing I'll have to be in the back with her. I playfully say, "Good, now maybe you'll talk to me," then hop into the back with the patient. We begin riding to the hospital. The heat was on full blast in the back of the ambulance, however it would not heat up. She was still smiling that big toothy smile and staring at me, not answering any of my questions. I looked down to grab my pen that fell on the floor, then looked back up. Out of nowhere, the highest pitched screams and shrieks filled the air as she started lunging at me and grabbing at me. She clashed her teeth and bit in my direction, trying all she could to break loose. Luckily, the stretcher seatbelts were secured to her, making me just out of reach. The huge crazed smile broke into a frightening look of terror and anger. My back was against the wall of the box. Luckily, we were already at the hospital, unintentionally a Catholic one. As the ambulance drove in, the patient stopped all she was doing. She calmly looked straight back forward and went mute again. We brought her to the ER and talked with the doctor about what happened, who, needless to say, was astonished by the story. From the time I was 9 years old until almost my 11th birthday, my family lived in what I believe was an extremely haunted house. I could probably write a novel on all the experiences I had there, but this one event has stayed with me the most. This happened when I was 10 years old. On this day, it was probably mid-afternoon or so, my mom hooked my dog outside for a walk. I was inside watching TV. Suddenly, I hear my mom screaming from outside. I jump up and run to where she is standing in our yard. She's crying, staring where I can see a red, wettish-looking mark on the road. We go back inside and my mom tells me that she saw our indoor-outdoor cat Spotty get hit by a car. She wouldn't go into full details at the time because I was a young child and she wanted to spare my feelings. But when I asked her about this event a few years ago, she told me that she remembers seeing Spotty's body going under and around the wheel. My mom went back outside to look for Spotty, but aside from the bloodstain on the road, there was no sign of his body anywhere. My mom chalked it up to being that maybe he had gotten stuck under the van that hit him. Note the van hadn't stopped at all, even though my mom was screaming. Fast forward a week. We've all been grieving for our cat. It had been nearly a week since Spotty was hit. It was about 8:30 or 9 p.m. I was in the kitchen with my mom, baking cookies. There is a window above our sink that looks out onto our front porch, and on the porch is a motion detection light. I was at the sink washing our mixing bowl when the light turned on, catching my eye. I look out the window and scream, dropping the bowl. Outside on the porch, meowing to be let in, was Spotty. My mom ran to the door and let the cat inside. He walked in, jumped on the counter, and began eating from a bowl of cat food we kept there. I remember petting him, and my mom and I checked him over. He was completely unharmed. There was nothing to suggest that he had been hit by a van or been missing for a week. No marks, scratches, or blood, even though we had both seen the bloodstain on the road. We kept him inside that night, but when we woke up the next morning, Spotty was gone, and we never saw him again. A few months back, I had gone to the Hotel del Coronado for a work event. My company threw a huge party, and I was invited to an after-party in a coworker's room. I was having a great time when someone at that party was complaining that we were staying in the haunted room. She was so freaked out to have to sleep in it, but I got excited because I am so interested in things like that. I asked her to please take me to her room so I could see it, but she refused. She told me she didn't want to be in that room any more than she had to. I asked her to at least tell me what room it was, and when she did, I realized it was about 5 doors down from the room I was in. I decided to drop the subject and continue to enjoy myself. It was getting pretty late, so I said my goodbyes and walked out the front door. Once it closed, I started to feel a little anxious. An eerie feeling came over me, so I decided to get out of there as soon as I could. As I was walking down the stairs, my ears started to ring. It was so loud, and then I started to hear my name. At first it sounded muffled, and then it was like the entire hallway was echoing my name. It was bouncing off the walls, and was echoing louder and louder. I was so frightened I ran out of the building as fast as I could. I noticed this weird heaviness as I was making my way back into my room. When I passed a mirror and looked into it, it looked like I was seeing myself in the third person, like I was outside of myself looking in. I felt so scared, and when I got back to my room I woke up my husband. He was so tired but got up to talk to me, and when I told him everything that had happened, I could feel this energy leaving my body. The heaviness was gone, but it was replaced with a deep, deep sadness. I decided to go to sleep, but I had had a dream of this woman in a black dress mourning. She had long brown hair and was talking, but no sounds were coming out of her mouth. When I woke up, I decided to Google the hotel and found a picture of the woman that had supposedly killed herself at that hotel. It looked like the woman from my dream. She apparently had a fight with her lover on the way to that hotel, but he got off on the train at a different stop and never met up with her. It was surreal and terrifying. Needless to say, I would not go near that building the rest of the trip, nor will I ever go back to that hotel. I am from a small island in the South Pacific called Tonga, and with over 100 islands, visiting every island is a feat in its own. A story I heard from my grandparents is one I would like to share. A while back in the 60s and 70s, there was a group of people who decided to visit some islands. Some were beautiful, and some were just way too small to live comfortably on. This group eventually landed on a small island and decided to look around. Some decided to swim in the shallow waters, and some decided to search the very small forest covering 80% of the island. Night was setting in, so they decided just to stay on the island and go back to the main island in the morning to eat and grab supplies. They decided to sleep in the forest, since sleeping by the water is not a good idea. Eventually they found a clearing and decided to hunker there. In the middle of this clearing was a huge arch made of stone. Most paid no mind to it and called it a night. In the morning, everyone got up and realized that everyone who slept under this arch was ripped in half from the torso. The legs were hanging from the arch. Disturbed and traumatized, they didn't disturb the bodies and immediately left, vowing to never return to that island. Locals say that it was a site of cannibalism, since that was prevalent in our culture way back in the day. Others say it was a demon who lived on that island. No one really knows, but nobody ever goes to that island anymore. Ever heard of the phone app called Find My Friend? It uses GPS on a person's phone so you can see where your friends and family are, like if they're close by, that kind of thing. To make a long story short, our mom passed in February. It was a devastating loss that we are still coming to terms with. On the day Mom died, her location showed up as unknown. This is weird to begin with, as Sis has had Mom's phone since that day. A few weeks ago, Sis calls me. She tells me that Mom is in her own house, in the dining room to be exact. Apparently a notification popped up on her phone about it. Sis still has Mom's phone in her house, 30 minutes away from where she was located at our parents' house. Now is also the time to mention that Mom got cremated. Where are her ashes, you may ask? Currently in the dining room, while we wait for her plot to be ready. So we come to today, and Mom has been in the dining room for the last hour. Sis keeps refreshing the app, and she is still there. Sometimes, about 20 plus years ago, while I was still a baby, my mother used to sleep alone in another bedroom when she had something important to do early the next morning. So she could get a good night's sleep, as I would wake up and start crying, I would sleep in the same room with my father during those nights. It was something normal, and they would do it the other way around too. Recently, while discussing a ghost story we'd seen on TV, she mentioned that one of those nights she was woken up by the voices of two women who clearly came from the same room, while nobody else was in the apartment apart from me and my father. She said that the two women were talking about her, and that she could hear them very clearly. She wasn't facing the source of the sound, and she said she was so terrified that she couldn't bring herself to turn and face them. It was like she couldn't move her body. One of the women said something like, "Leave her alone, she's sleeping." And the other replied, "She's not sleeping, she's faking it, look," and grabbed my mother's hair and started pulling, shaking her head back and forth until my mother started crying. Then they continued to talk about some normal subject, which my mother doesn't remember very well. After some time, the voices stopped. When I heard the story, I immediately shook it off as probably being a dream, or even sleep paralysis, but she swears that it felt real, and she clearly remembers remaining awake for the rest of the night, being too afraid to move from that position. When she told my father the next morning, he kept asking why she didn't come to him or yell for him, but she says she simply couldn't. The door was locked, and we lived on the 4th floor of the building, so no one could have entered the apartment. She would have absolutely no reason to invent this story, and I don't know what to make of this, if it was in fact a dream, or not. Before I start, I just want to mention that I don't have any carbon monoxide problems in my house, so that isn't causing any of this. I've been experiencing pretty weird things that I cannot explain. My cats have been acting extremely abnormal. They're not in any pain. There's nothing wrong with them. I don't have any plants they could be eating and getting poisoned by. I don't have any mouse traps or any poisonous thing outside they could be getting into that could possibly affect their behavior. They're inside cats as well, so they're only in my house, and there's nothing here that could be affecting their behavior. I haven't changed anything, their food, treats, or cat litter. They're about 7-ish years old, give or take a few years. The girl cat was feral, she isn't fixed. Her behavior has been normal since I've had her, but I felt the need to mention that. The male cat is fixed and has been for years. Now that I've gotten that out of the way, I can talk about their behavior. All of what I'm mentioning is new and extremely abnormal for them. They've been staring at walls, growling at my fireplace, which I've never used. They'll growl at the corners of my room, under my bed, basically anywhere and anything at any given time. They look absolutely horrified while they're growling as well, and I can't tell what they're seeing. Their faces look as if they're fighting for their life. They smack at the air like they're seeing something. They also don't want to be around me as much anymore. They're normally constantly around me, sleeping near me. The male cat even sleeps in front of me until I'm basically spooning him, and he loves it so much. Now they basically run from me. They dodge my hand when I go to pet them. They almost want nothing to do with me. They look at me sometimes like I'm trying to kill them when I'm just standing there. They'll even hiss and smack in my direction with these huge, crazy wide eyes. Now I can explain other experiences I've been having. Nothing in my life has changed. My life isn't any more stressful than usual, which isn't that much anyways. When I get home though, I feel absolutely drained. I feel as though I haven't slept in weeks. I'll get home and once I walk through that door, I'm knocked out like a light, and I'll be out for hours. I've slept through countless alarms that I'll set for myself to wake up at a certain time to eat or get work done. All of my electronics have been acting insane. My computer will stutter between me switching tabs and it'll flicker between the two while making a vibrating kind of noise. Neither of these things act weird outside of my house, which I have always thought was strange. I also love lighting incense and candles. I don't have any vents around where I keep my candles, but there have been countless times when my candles slowly die out like someone is blowing them out. The same happened with my incense. Every once in a while, some of my things will be moved, but I never know if maybe I just bumped into it, misplaced it, or maybe somebody else moved it. I've lost countless books, candles, notepads, pens, pencils, and things related to that. No one really goes into my room though, so I don't know how to explain that. The last thing I'll mention is my dreams have been insane. I'll have dreams about me drowning, my biggest fear, flowers lighting on fire and burning into ash, people whispering nothing but gibberish to me, and so on. Some have been played through like car crashes, airplane crashes, me drowning, me being lit on fire, and so on, and they're terrifying. All of these experiences have gradually happened over a few months. They don't always happen every single day. It's nothing super rampant, but it's noticeable. I'm worried about it, but I don't know who to tell or how to talk about it. Hey there. Thanks for checking out this 10-part paranormal collection. If you have a favorite story or would like to leave feedback, please do so in the comments below. If you did not get the reference at the beginning of this video, I'd like to recommend Art Bell's radio shows to you. He was the founder and original host of Coast to Coast AM, which is a paranormal themed radio show, as well as the founder and host of other related shows such as Dark Matter and Midnight in the Desert. At this time of year, I definitely recommend his Ghost to Ghost Halloween specials. Seriously, if you've never listened before, you're in for a treat. That's no trick. Alright, have a great start to your week, and a happy Halloween.